Hey everybody, hope you're having a good Sunday. And this is Matt. I just thought I'd check in with a video, kind of a question or challenge, more of a question, I guess. And so, first of all, just wanted to mention, been rereading this the last few days. I picked it up, saw it on the bookshelf. Thought it'd be a good time to read it again. This came out about a year or two ago. It's by Mark Lewison, book on the Beatles. Supposed to be a volume one. You can see there's supposed to be a three-part series. This is the only one that's out so far. Don't know when the other two are coming out, but I hope soon because it's really one of the best books written on the band. If you looking for a good Beatles book to read, I did a review on this when it came out back a year or two ago, so I'm not going to rehash all that. But other than to say, it's just a really great book, and it's kind of amazing all the coincidences and just chance happenings that occurred that had they not occurred, and there's dozens of them throughout this book, the Beatles probably would have never happened. And the more amazing part of that is that the chances of most of those things happening were remote at best, like winning the lottery remote. So it's just sort of incredible that the band ever even met and came together and became the Beatles at all, in addition to the great music they did. But why I mentioned in this book, as other than just say, it's definitely worth checking out if you're a Beatles fan, is that this goes way, way back into the 1800s, back into their great great grandparents, and sort of how they came to be in England and in Liverpool specifically, or how their kids that became the Beatles' grandparents and parents came to be in Liverpool. And it goes through a lot of, other than the Beatles story, it goes through a lot of sort of history and sociological factors at play as far as post-war Britain and the education system and the class system and the TV coming in and music coming in and how that differed in the influence of America and so forth and so on. It goes through mentions a lot of music here is what I'm getting at. And it sort of mentions some of the music that the Beatles' parents and grandparents listened to. Lists a lot of music that, of course, the Beatles, John and Paul and George and Ringo, that kind of really got into wanting to play music when they heard rock and roll with Bill Haley and the Comets and Elvis and Little Richard and those guys. But they were by that time teenagers, so it sort of goes through a lot of the music that they listened to or were aware of, kind of liked, even in the pre-rock and roll era. It'll talk about John Lennon's mom Julia playing certain songs by Johnny Ray and sort of pop standards and jazz music that John Lennon always liked throughout his life, music from the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And so it'll list Paul. Actually, his father was in a band way back when, and realized that Paul could sing well, and he also taught him a little bit of piano and got him a trumpet. Paul learned trumpet a little bit long before he learned guitar and long before rock and roll came along. So it's sort of, we'll list in here the songs that Paul would play back then when he was 10 or 11, whatever, on piano and so forth. And he even kind of wrote a few songs way back then, it says. But and John Lennon too. George and John had bands before they all knew each other, and they'd sort of play some rock and roll stuff, but they play some pre-rock and roll music. So as I've been going through the book, I've been listing in my notebook when they'll mention a song and an artist, and just writing it down, and then going back and going to YouTube and digging those songs up and giving them a listen. And pretty much been a lot of fun because there's a lot of great music, and a lot of it, is from the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, and even some of the rock and roll music that they mentioned that I'd never heard of, songs that I'd never heard of anyway, of the early days of rock and roll, and the skiffle songs, because skiffle was another big thing that came out. Wasn't really ever big in America, I don't think, but it was big in England. Right, kind of coincided with rock and roll's arrival. Skiffle's a little more country and folk influence, sort of not too far off from rock and roll, but not quite as raucous, I guess. And so I've been writing those down, and I wish I would have written everything down because, of course, there's songs in there listed like Heartbreak Hotel by Elvis and stuff that I know, but it'd make a great mix CD. So that's a lot of fun. If you read that book, this book, or if you've already got a copy of it. It's just been kind of fun to me. Maybe it's something you'd like to do too. Just go through there, and when you see a song, go to YouTube and look it up, because a lot of really cool stuff that I've heard here in the last few days doing that, and some of it I've really liked. And there's been very few that I was thinking was not that great, but most of it was really good to very good. So that's been a fun little experiment. Anyway, my question is this for the resident Beatle fans out there in the VC, or even the people that don't really like the Beatles, whatever. Um, are you, all things considered, looking back now from the span of 40 years or whatever it's been since they've broken up, are you 40 some plus years, are you, and putting aside the fact that yes, it would be great if we could jump in a time machine and go back to see the Beatles live at Shea Stadium, or playing at the Cavern Club even earlier than that, are you glad that they, once they broke up, that they never got back together? That's the question. Because when I was, like I said before, I really got into the Beatles in the 70s, even though I was aware of them in the 60s. But 70s, I was like 6 to 16. That's when I really got into them. And of course, they were broken up by then. And there was always, because at that time, of course, John was still alive and George too. So there was always that, will the Beatles ever get back together? Around about 76 or so, I remember there were a lot of magazine articles. Somebody had offered them, I don't know, it was $1 million to play one show. Of course, they didn't do it. This whole Saturday Night Live thing that was kind of a takeoff on that they would give them $100 to show up and play, and they didn't do that. So anyway, do you think it's good that they broke up at the height of their popularity, which very few groups have ever done, other than the Beatles? I can think of the Jam, maybe the Shangri-Las. They didn't. I don't know that they consciously made the decision to break up, but that type of music was kind of going out of style. But I can't think of many other bands that did. I'm sure there's some others, but are you glad that they broke up at the height of their popularity, and despite calls to get back together all the way up to when John died, really probably even when George died, they resisted that? And are you glad that they never came back together for whatever it would have been, a one-shot show, a tour, to make some new albums, or just to regroup and carry on like the Rolling Stones and the Kinks and the Who did? I'll save my answer for later, but I was just wondering if you think it would have been just as good as it was, or close enough, or if you think it would have ruined something that was a once in a lifetime special thing if they had gotten back together. So that's the question. Make your videos and weigh in, and have a good Sunday.